Greetings and salutations, YouTubers. This is ZillaFan85, and for today's video, I've got another video game discussion. This was one that I was definitely looking forward to. For today, we've got Godzilla Monster of Monsters for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This game was released back in 1988, so essentially it was released during the time frame when the Heisei era Godzilla films started. But the game, though, is more so based on events from the Showa era of the Godzilla films, and especially so you'll see with the characters in the game, the enemies, and so on and so forth. But obviously that's fine because for me, again, as I had stated numerous times, the Showa era is my favorite of the entire Godzilla series. So this was a game that for me, I know this game in particular has had mixed reception. Some people really enjoy it, others not so much. Obviously, I know the James Rolfe, the Angry Video Game Nerd, did a video on this, and obviously a spoof parody or spoof review, whichever you want to call it. And I enjoyed the video, but just as he's done some other reviews of games that he ripped on, but were ones that I actually enjoyed, namely so like with the original Ninja Turtles game for the NES, which is one of my top 10 favorite video games, I should say. This one, Godzilla Monster of Monsters, it didn't make it. I don't know any of you that did see my my ranking of my top 10 favorite games. This did not make my top 10, but I would definitely say, though, that this is actually in my top 20 favorite video games of all time, for sure. And actually, too, this is my favorite of any Godzilla game that's been released. Because personally, some of the later entries, which I do have, like for my PS2 or the Wii, I have Godzilla Save the Earth and Godzilla Unleashed. I enjoy those games. They're kind of fun, but obviously those are really just strictly fighting games, which I like fighting games, but they're not my favorites. I really... as I've told my friend too, I really prefer adventure/platformer games the most. Those are my absolute favorite types of games. So this one falling into that category of an adventure/platformer, whichever you prefer in this case. That's why it kind of falls in line that I actually really do enjoy it. I know some of the gameplay can get kind of repetitive, but I like some of what it offers, or not some. I like a lot of what it offers, and I like actually being able to play that sort of adventure style instead of just a straight up fighting game. And obviously there's battles in the game, but that's not just completely the focus of it. So that's one thing that I really like and really find unique about this particular Godzilla game. So that's why, for me, like I said, it's my favorite Godzilla video game that's ever been released, and like I said, definitely would fall in my top 20. And I do play it quite often, to be honest with you. So I did want to go ahead, though, obviously just kind of break down some of the things about the game itself, the plot, and just some of the things to look for, and obviously the characters that are involved and whatnot. Unlike my previous two videos with Mario 3 and Sonic 3 and Knuckles, where they had had secrets and sort of like goals, side goals, and this and that you can really achieve. This game is a little more straightforward than that. There's not really, at least as far as I know, there's not really that many hidden items in the game, or any sort of secrets to really unlock. Not as far as I know, anyway. And even with trying to do some research to see if there was anything, I didn't really find anything. So this is a little bit more straightforward. I probably won't spend too much time, but I definitely just kind of wanted to discuss the game, though. So I was really looking forward to this. So without further ado, So once you go ahead and start a new game, and I apologize if the picture's a little bit blurry here. I did the best I could, but with scrolling text, it's not the easiest. Um, but basically, though, as you can see, a picture of the well, at least of the planetary solar system as it is, and it shows. Basically a breakdown when you start up a new game, which you can do when you first load up the game. You get options where you can play a new game, play a last game, which is basically a continue of where you were. If you get a game over or something like that. And then, of course, you got a password game where you can enter passwords to get different things. Like, for instance, one that I always note is destroy all monsters, but instead, where you should have the letter 0 or letter O, you would actually put the number 0. And once you input that password, it would bring you to the first world of the game, but you'd have all all the main boss monsters available to fight at the start of the game. So you got things like that, and you've got that monster 0. Password, which starts you on the game and starts you with King Ghidorah as the only enemy monster that you face in the first world. Anyway, and then of course you can input the first 3 letters of whichever planet that you want to start on to start from there, so on and so forth. So there are some passwords available. I don't really bother with them because most of the time when I'm going to play this game, I'm just going to play a new game from scratch and just play it through as normal. So but once you do choose a new game, that's when this, well, first you get this image on the screen that appears, and there's a few different images that sort of pop up as the text on the bottom scrolls along. I only took a picture of the opening part of this, obviously, but basically, as it states here, in the year 2XXX, whatever X stands for, I don't know, but AD, as you can see, and basically it goes on to say that the Earth receives a declaration of war from Planet X. So obviously we've got the return of, even though it's not outright stated, obviously the return of the Exilians here, which of course were the alien enemies from Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, or otherwise known as Invasion of Astro Monster. So they've sent the Earth a declaration of war, and they want to use the entire planetary solar system as the battlefield. They've gathered up what they call their Legion of Monsters, which are the main boss monsters of the game, sort of strategically placing them within the planets of the solar system, and basically the solar system becomes a battlefield, and you've got to carry through it and try to make it to the end. And obviously the final world of the game would be on Planet X itself. So Earth goes into combat with them, and then of course they employ the services, if you will, of course, the king of the monsters himself, Godzilla, as well as their other guardian monster, Mothra. And so that's basically when the story starts from there. So obviously you're going to play from the monster's point of view. So again, looking at Godzilla and Mothra and playing through to go through the different planets and try to make your way to the end and defeat Planet X and their Legion of Monsters, of course. So that's basically the main crux of the storyline of the game. But to me, it's actually a really, really cool concept, honestly. I really enjoy it. And now, instead of like with Invasion of Astro Monster, where the action really just took place either on Earth or Planet X, now you actually incorporate the other planets as well. So I think that's a really, really neat idea. So right off the bat, something that I really enjoyed with the game. So anyway, as we carry on here. Now, after you get that brief, that synopsis, I should say, of what the story is of the game, that's when the game loads up to the main screen, or the first planet of the game, which of course is planet Earth. That's where you start from, and then you carry through there. We'll get to more of that in just a moment here, but I first kind of wanted to showcase a little bit. So basically the way it is, and as you can see, it's sort of like playing monster chess, as I sort of equate it. Where you see you've got these hexagonal pieces, if you will, or these hexagonal shapes on like a board or on a map screen, as it is. And then, of course, you got that little selection piece where you can choose your monster. Obviously, your playable monsters, which again I'm going to get into a little bit more later. But you've got Godzilla and Mothra, so you can select them and then move them along the map screen or along the board. They can move up to a certain amount of spaces at a time. Godzilla can move up to 2 spaces at a time. Mothra can move up to 4. And really, she's the only one that can move that many, because all other monsters can only move up to 2 spaces at a time. So you've got those monsters which you can move, and then of course the CPU controls the enemy boss monsters, a legion of monsters, which I've showcased. The 2 that appear in the first world there on the right. So you see their icons there, and you can actually select the icon which will give just a very brief bit of information on the monster, what the monster's name is, and their summation of their health meter, their life meter / health meter, to let you know, obviously, how many bars of health that they've got, which obviously does change along the game as you play through it. But basically, though, like I said, so you got to choose, and you can move along the map screen to these different hexagonal slots. But like I said, you got to be kind of strategic about it. Because you want to try to place your monster in an area that's going to be most optimal. You've got different sorts of objects available on these octagonal spaces as well, and because each space represents a different stage, because whichever number of spaces you move, be it 1, 2, or even 3 and 4 if you're using Mothra, basically then you've got to play through those spaces in these sort of action scene stages, and the stages are different depending on which terrain you're moving over. So you got to play through those and carry along, and once you reach the end of the last space, / stage that you're playing through, then you go back to the map screen. So you get a turn, and then the CPU gets a turn where they move. So, like I said, so that's why it's kind of like a game of chess, and a lot of other people have noted that, which is honestly something that I actually really like. I think it's really, really cool. And I know when NECA released their version of the NES Godzilla figure, they also, on the box art, they've got a picture of the map screen of Earth on there, which to me is actually really, really awesome. That's something I definitely like. I don't have that figure, but just for that alone, it would almost be a selling point eventually if I do get a hold of it. So anyway, though, so that's sort of a bit of a rundown of how that all plays out. And then, of course, once your monster does meet the space next to one of the CPU, once one of the boss legion of monsters, that's when you've got the option to engage into combat with them. Where the game will ask you if you want to battle them. And if you wanna not battle them, then really you can't move more than a space that touches that where their space is, basically. And then at the same time, a lot of times they're going to move to attack you, and they'll move once they move to the space up to you. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it'll automatically engage in combat. So you'll enter that battle screen with whichever enemy monster that you're facing at the time. They don't always, the CPU doesn't always engage you, but most of the time it does. So that's some kind of cool things that I wanted to note about that. So now a little bit more of a run through here. So, obviously there are 8 worlds of the game, 8 planets that you're going to play through. I wanted to get, obviously shots of the map screens of each planet. So you start out, like I said, you start out, World 1 is on Earth. So you do start out on the Earth, and you can see the map screen there, which looked a little bit like the previous picture, but now obviously I've got the whole map screen shown. Now you can see the pictures of the terrains, various terrains that exist on these planets, because each world has different, not only a different layout, obviously, but a different setup for terrains. So those sort of two-peak looking ones, those are your mountainous terrain stages. Then where you've got like that one peak with the sort of fizzy looking stuff coming out of it, that's your volcanic stages. Then those greenish looking ones that have that sort of hook on it, that's actually a jungle stage. And then you've got that sort of greenish swirly looking image, that's your hyperspace stage. Those are sort of special stages. You can face unique enemies, and it's a good chance to not only recover health and whatnot, but sometimes because you can attain enough points to level up, which is another facet of the game. I'll get into that though in just a bit. Then at the end, I know. At the end, actually, you can see from both worlds here. Towards the end, where the boss monster, Legion of Monsters, are, you can see you've got those sort of industrial looking places, or that sort of industrial looking setup. Those are your fortress stages, with the last stage on the map, that sort of satellite, that's your final base of each world. Each world has one of those final bases. It's got the fortresses, and then of course the final base itself. And the other stage type, you'll see this sort of dome looking thing. That's actually a city stage. So that's the one other stage which doesn't appear, not in these two worlds anyways, but that is another stage type. And obviously enemies do sort of reflect whichever stage type you're in, and then obviously you just have to be kind of mindful. I know a lot of people say Mothra's not the best with clearing through the game, but I can get through it with her. Godzilla does obviously play through a little bit better, even though he's a larger target and can get hit easier. It obviously is a little bit smoother to play through with him, but Mothra is definitely playable though as well. You just got to get the hang of it. So like I said, so World 1, you've got the Earth. World 2, then, you start carrying through the solar system. So World 2 is Mars. And you can see, too, in not every case, but most cases, each time you go to a new world, there's usually going to be a new boss Legion of Monster that's going to show up as well. And then, of course, the monsters who were on the previous worlds will, whether you defeat them or not, will reappear on the new world. So that does those are a couple things to note. So by the time you reach the final world, you're going to have a lot of you're going to have the entire Legion of Monsters basically by the end. So like I said, those are a couple things I just kind of wanted to bring up there. So now, after you go through the Earth and Mars, then you carry along. And as you can see now, you've got World 3, which is Jupiter, and of course World 4, which is Saturn. And then another thing, though, that I wanted to note is different worlds obviously kind of host different sorts of terrains. Earth was sort of a mixed bag where we've got a lot of mountainous stages, and those are honestly probably among my least favorite stages to go through in the game, just personally. But you've got some volcano stages, you've got some jungle stages, you've got some hyperspace stages, and then of course the fortress and final base stages, without any cityscape stages for some reason. But anyway, though, so that's sort of a run through that. With Mars, you've mainly got the volcanic stages. Those are what you'll most see on Mars, but there are some mountainous stages, some and then of course the fortress and final base stages. Now here on Jupiter, as you can see, very largely based on jungle stages. For whatever reason, that's the way that they set it up. But you've also got some hyperspace stages, you got some mountainous stages, you've also got some city stages, and then of course the fortress and final base stages. And then on World 4, which is Saturn, you've got sort of a combination, a lot of city stages, but also a lot of mountainous stages, some hyperspace stages, and then again the fortress and final base stages. So that's sort of a rundown of those. And as you can see, Jupiter and Saturn are both very large worlds. There are some worlds that are much bigger than others, so you'll kind of notice that as we look at the different map screens. And you've got World 5, which is Uranus, and World 6, which is Pluto. On Uranus, as you can see, not a very large world, which is odd because Uranus is one of the gas giants, but the map screen-wise, it's one of the smallest of the game, honestly. And as you can see here, it mostly consists of hyperspace stages, which is kind of cool for leveling up. Although, one thing with leveling up, though, you can only reach up to a certain point for each world. But nonetheless, though, still a good thing, and of course, still for health recovery and whatnot, that definitely helps. But other than the hyperspace stages, then you've just got the fortress and final base stages. So that's about it for Uranus, but definitely, as you can see, the layout of it, and with the amount of boss monsters that you've got to face here, this is really going to be almost like a battleground world when you think about it. But once you get back to, or once you move along, I should say, to World 6, which is Pluto. And yes, obviously, at this point in time, Pluto was still considered a planet, and in my heart, I still consider it a planet. I was not a fan of when they demoted its planetary status to a dwarf planet, but that's just me. So I'm a fan of Pluto. But at this certain point in time as well, though, this is when Pluto's orbit was closer than Neptune's. So that's why they've got Pluto right after Uranus. But anyway, though, and then, as you can see here, oddly enough, Pluto, one of the smallest planet, when it was at the time considered a planet. Yet map screen wise, it's got one of, if not the largest map screens available in the game. But that's kind of cool, though. I like the layout of it, and it's got a combination pretty much of all the different stage types. You've got the mountainous stages, volcano stages, jungle stages, city stages, hyperspace stages, and then the fortress and final base stages. So you've got pretty much the combination of all the stage types in here, and then you've got this sort of layout, as you can see, like that, with the planet sort of splitting apart, because obviously you can only move where you've got the hexagonal spaces. So and the way that I personally like to do it is kind of divide and conquer, as I call it. So I sort of, where you got Godzilla and Mothra, I kind of split them up and go in each direction, and then kind of rejoin again once you get towards the end of the world, which is obviously where the final base is. So that's my strategy that I like to play when I go through these worlds, for the most part. Um, and especially as you get to the later worlds, and again, this is something I'm going to get into in just a bit here. Like I said, with leveling up, you gain more health and you gain more power. So even with Mothra, the game, clearing through the game and even taking on enemy monsters is not nearly as tough as it is in the beginning. So. But anyway, that's sort of a run through of these two worlds, and now we reach the final two worlds. You've got World 7, which is Neptune, and then the final world, World 8, Planet X. So first with Neptune, now as you can see here, Neptune, not too big of a world, but obviously the big thing to note here with Neptune is that it completely consists of the fortress stages and of course the final base stage. And the final base stage, by the way, it just plays through like a fortress stage, but obviously it is the final base of the world. So once you clear that stage, you can move to the next world with whichever monster has cleared it. But you got to clear through it with both monsters, and after the last of your two monsters clears the world, then you move on to the next world. So that's sort of a big key to note here. I probably should have gotten into that earlier. The other thing to note is if one of your monsters does die, if you lose, because you only get one life with each monster for the game, But like if you've got, if say Godzilla dies but Mothra makes it to the end of the world, then both monsters will reappear in the next world, but the monster that died even though they reappear, they lose a level. So if you were like entering a new world with level 5, then or if you had level 5 on a certain world and you died, but then came back on the next world, if the other monster made it through, then the monster that died would be down to level 4. So that's just kind of something that I wanted to note with that. Now, however, though, if the last remaining of your playable monsters is on screen and dies, then that's an automatic game over, and you'd have to pick up, using the last game to pick up from the world that you were on, obviously. So that's a big key to note. So if you don't want to get that game over at all, you've really got to make sure that your last monster that's on that the last of your two playable monsters that's on screen gets through the world. So that was something I should have gone into earlier, but as it just kind of came to my mind now, I just kind of wanted to mention it. So anyway, though, like I said, so that's so as far as Neptune goes, though, it's all fortress stages and the final base stage. But that kind of lets you know that you're really in the crux of it now. You're really in the nitty-gritty towards the latter part of the game, because then you reach World 8, which again is Planet X, and World 8, just as with Pluto, is a combination of all the different stage types and plays in this sort of narrowish map screen, as you can see here. So definitely when you move through, you got to be mindful of that, and just I would say don't be too aggressive. Just sort of play a little bit, then let the boss monsters come to you a little bit, and then just kind of go from there and try to pick them apart one at a time. Because again, now Planet X is where you've got all of the boss legion of monsters available. And this is the only part in the game where you've got them all now, because you got that final boss monster who does appear. And again, that's something I'm going to get into here very briefly. But again, just a run through. So you've got the mountainous stages, or you got the mountainous stages, volcanic stages, dome stages, hyperspace stages, jungle stages, and then of course the fortress and final base stages. So again, just, and some of them are just one of each. Obviously there's more fortress stages than any of the other stage types, but again though, you do have all the different stage types available though. And like I said, this is when that entire legion of monsters, the boss monsters, are fully assembled in this world and only this world. So it's definitely a trek through to the end. But as long as you've steadily leveled up and reached this point, then it's definitely doable. Like I said, though, just kind of like, as I stated before, it's like playing a game of chess. So just try to be strategic about your movements. So, anyway. So, as I stated before, you've got two playable characters, the two monsters that you personally control. You've got Godzilla and you've got Mothra. And obviously just wanted to have just have some pictures of them going through the actual stage screens now. These obviously being mountainous stages that they're on. So you can kind of see a little bit of setup as you play through. Again, Godzilla, fairly big target. Mothra is in her adult Imago form, and obviously flying the entire time that she's on in a stage, I should say. So she moves pretty quickly, and you can evade objects and enemies a bit, and even evade obstacles if you don't want to clear them through. I usually like to try and actually just clear them through, because this way you can build up your points and you can level up, because that's the other thing with the game is leveling up. As you see, you start the game, of course, on level 1. The different characters have different amounts of health available. Godzilla starts the game with 6 bars of health. Mothra starts with 8. But as you level up, those bars do increase. You've got your health, your life bar, and then your power bar, which measures your special attack, which I've also showcased here. Godzilla, of course, with his signature atomic breath, and Mothra with those sort of wing scrolls. I think that's supposed to be like her poison powder. It was never really specified, but I believe that's supposed to be her poison powder, which you can repeatedly utilize, as long as you've still got some of your power meter filled up, because obviously when you use your special attacks, it drains them, but they gradually replenish themselves as they with time after you use the special attacks. With Godzilla in the beginning, though, and obviously in the beginning they replenish slowly, but they'll replenish quicker as you level up, because again, both meters, the life meter and power meter, both increase as you level up and go through. And like I said, too, one thing to note, and especially I noticed this once you get past level 8, your monsters actually do, their attacks become stronger. So like I said, they actually do gain power themselves, because their attacks start wielding more damage, which again makes it easier to clear stages and of course take on the boss monsters. So that's why, like I said, that's why even with Mothra in the latter worlds of the game, clearing through it's not too bad. So those are just some good things to kind of note when playing through the game here. And other than that, though, as far as leveling up, like I said, you can only reach a certain level per world. I'll go through a quick little run through of that. On Earth, you can reach up to level 3. On Mars, you can reach up to level 5. On Jupiter, you can reach up to level 7. On Saturn, you can reach up to level 8. On Uranus, you can reach up to level 10. On Pluto, you can reach up to level 12. On Neptune, you can reach up to level 14. And on Planet X, you can reach up to level 16. So level 16 is the max. So certainly by that point, obviously, you'll be well equipped to not only play through the world, but to take on the enemy monsters as well. So I definitely wanted to make sure I kind of covered that. The other thing I kind of wanted to mention here too is that originally, and it's kind of a funny thing too. Originally, the game was intended to incorporate Rodan and Anguirus as playable characters as well. So you would have had a team of 4 essentially instead of 2. And the funny thing with that is, ever since I got this game, since I was a young kid, I had always been saying to myself, why was Rodan and Anguirus not included in the game? This was before many years before I had ever known vis-a-vis the internet that they were intended to be playable characters in the game. So that's just kind of funny, I had always thought to myself that it would have been awesome if they were in the game, and then later found out that they were originally intended to be in the game. And I know that these sprites for them do exist, and I believe through cheat codes at least for the Japanese version of the game that you can get that you can play as Anguirus. I've seen him on screen a couple times, but because it's kind of a cheat code-ish, or not a cheat code-ish, a cheat code sort of character, he doesn't take any damage, and really he's only got sort of a destructive walk where he will take out enemies and objects just by walking through the screen. So so with that, not really the best way to play it through if you want to try to play it legitimately, but I mean, at least though it's something. So I don't believe that either of them are available on the US version of the game, but I know that, like I said, at least that through cheat codes, Anguirus is playable in the Japanese version. So I did want to kind of bring that up as well, since we were discussing the playable characters in the game. So anyway, as we move along, so now that I've covered the playable characters, now we want to go into a bit of our main enemy monsters. These are the main bosses, which in the game are referred to as the Legion of Monsters, because that's what Planet X had assembled them as. So as we go through, you see you've got Gezora, Mogera, and Varan. And I'll cover where you first see them at, because like I said, after they first appear, whether you defeat them or not on that world, they'll come in. They'll be back in the next world, and obviously that'll be a continual process throughout the game until you reach the final world, where you've got the entire Legion of Monsters that you'll have to face. So anyways, Gezora and Mogera first appear on the Earth, so they're your 2 main boss monsters on Earth, which again you saw from the map screen. So and when you face them, obviously when you face a boss monster, it goes to this sort of plain black screen where you've got your obviously your monster's power and life meters available, but then you see the boss monster that you're facing, their power and life meters as well, and obviously they've each got their own attacks and their own abilities, of course, and you've got to try to defeat them. And obviously, like I said, they respawn on the next world. after you defeat them, but they'll respawn on the next world either way, and again, that's a continual process throughout the game. With Gizora, obviously, he's really the easiest character to take on. He doesn't really do too much damage, really just sort of this glitchy thing that he does where he kind of pins you in the corner and just basically stalls for time to try to end the battle, because the battles run on a timer. I think it's 90 seconds, but don't quote me on that. But he doesn't really wield any sort of real damage that he can do to your character. So other than that sort of glitchy thing with him pinning you down, he's pretty easy to defeat. And I know that he never actually appeared in any Godzilla film, or at least not an actual appearance other than any stock footage. But his first appearance was in the film Space Amoeba, obviously a different Toho film. Then you've got Mogera. And Mogera is a little bit more dangerous, not anywhere near as bad as some of the latter monsters of the game, but he does have this energy cannon that he fires out from his eyes or his antennas, which can do some damage, and he will use that attack a lot when you're battling against him. He also likes to sort of ram your character as well, charge at you and ram you. So those are sort of the main things that they do here. They don't have a lot of different attacks that they utilize. Everything is pretty straightforward. And while we're at it too, with going back to with Godzilla and Mothra, Mothra's attacks are very limited. Obviously, I showed the special attacks. Otherwise, she's got this laser beam or laser blast rather, that she fires from her antennas, and that's really her normal melee attack, if you will, which you use throughout the game. But again, as you level up, it does get stronger and wield more damage. With Godzilla, he's got a bit more of a move set with his standard melee attacks. He's got you can punch, you can kick. You can do a jump kick if you jump and then kick. You can also crouch and hit the kick button, and that'll do a tail swipe. And you can even sort of do a tail swipe and then lift yourself into the air to do an aerial tail swipe as well. So he's got several moves in his arsenal that he can perform. Probably more than most of the other characters in the game, but he is Godzilla, of course, the king of the monsters, so it makes sense. But as far as Gizora and Mogera go, that's about it for their move sets. Then next you've got Varan, who first appears on Mars. He's got a few different moves. He's got this biting attack that he can unleash, and he can also slash you with his claws and kick at you. So those are his main attacks, more so just standard melee attacks that he can perform. He doesn't really have any special attacks. He's not really too difficult to deal with. He's just, obviously, as you can see, because he's got those long arms, he's got a fairly long reach. So when fighting him with Godzilla, that's one thing you've got to take into account. So just as with moving on the map screen, you've got to kind of have a strategy for these boss monsters as well. Again, you can engage them with either Godzilla or Mothra, but you just got to kind of know what you're getting into. And like with Mogera and some of the other monsters that fire beam weapons, sometimes they cannot fire them in certain directions. Like Mogera's energy cannon, he can either fire straight out or diagonally down. I think he might be able to fire diagonally up as well. But those are sort of the main directions, and of course his ramming attack that he does. But if you can sort of position, like if you're using Mothra and you can position yourself in an area where he cannot actually hit you with the cannon, then you can sort of sit there and just repeatedly perform your melee attack onto him. So just sort of an example, like I said, of just trying to know a strategy to take on the monsters. So, you know, and so that's just some sort of things that I wanted to kind of go into as well. Other than that, for these three, that's about it, though. So next up, as we continue with the Legion of Monsters, you've got Hedra and you've got Baragon. Hedra first appears on Jupiter. Again, not an overly difficult boss monster to deal with. His main attacks are he fires out these, he emits these sort of smoke rings, and he can emit a bunch of them at a time. They sort of go in this arching direction, going like from the top of his head and then sort of arching down. So you just got to kind of be mindful of those, and then he can sort of do this reaching with his arm, which I guess is supposed to be like a punch or something like that. Those are really the main moves that you've got to worry about with Hedra. Other than that, though, he doesn't do too much else. Originally, because when looking back with the unused characters of Rodan and Anguirus, there's also an unused sprite which actually does appear in the final credits of Hedra, where he's in his flying form. I don't know why they didn't decide to incorporate it in the game. I think that would have been kind of cool to allow him to maybe morph between the two forms. It would make for obviously a much more difficult battle, but for some reason they ended up not incorporating it in the game. So, and obviously, like I said, kind to me as a result of which the limited movesets that he does perform, he's really not too difficult to deal with. Next, you've got Baragon. Baragon first appears on Saturn. This is where things start to get a little tougher. He's not super tough to deal with, but he's definitely definitely tougher than most of your previous monsters that you've dealt with up to this point. Now, similar to Mogera's attack, but just referred to as different. He's got a heat beam which he fires, which he can fire from his mouth, and obviously that's reminiscent of his first film appearance, which was in Frankenstein Conquers the World. So he does have that. He does have his leaping attack, which again was something that he had in the movies. And of course, too, he can charge and ram you as well. And he's even got this sort of where he sort of looks around in this sort of taunting fashion. So he's got several moves in his arsenal. And like I said, he's a little bit tricky to deal with. And one thing, too, as you can see, he's on all fours. When he fires his heat beam, he stands up on his hind legs. But otherwise, he's on all fours. So if you're fighting him with Godzilla, trying to punch at him is not going to be the most conducive because you're not really going to connect with the punches. So mainly you've got to try to kick him and use your tail swipe for your melee attacks, and then of course, when possible, use your atomic breath. So with Godzilla, he can be a little bit tricky. I've actually found with Mothra, he can be a little bit easier to deal with because when she emits her, obviously with being able to fly around, obviously you can fly really low as the base of the screen goes, to use her I-beam, her laser beam melee attack, and then of course with her poison powder wings, since they go in that sort of diagonal downward direction, makes it a lot easier for her to connect with attacks than it does with Godzilla, or at least I found it that way anyway. So those to me are some good things to kind of note with that. Anyway, now that we've covered the monsters up to this point, now we're getting into the real nitty-gritty as far as the boss monsters go. Now we've got what I call, and what others have called as well, the big three. Yes, indeedy, folks. These are what numerous people, including myself, have called the Big Three. These are the final three boss Legion of Monsters that show up in the game, and of course, these are the most difficult to deal with. They're the strongest. They can wield the most damage to your characters. And like I said, these ones are not to be taken lightly. The first of the big three is Gigan. He first appears on Uranus. He's got his I-beam that he fires out. He's also got his buzzsaw attack, which they didn't really showcase too much in his film appearances, but it's definitely shown in full form here in the game. It's a very dangerous attack that again can cause a lot of damage to your monsters, so it's something you really got to watch out for. And of course, he can slash at you with his claws and kick at you. So he is a force to be reckoned with for sure. He's not as powerful as the other two, but definitely, like I said, definitely a force to be reckoned with. Now, one thing to note, and I never realized it before, I thought when he was performing the buzzsaw attack that you actually weren't able to inflict damage on him, but I was later on discovered that you actually can. So, and in a way you're kind of better off still trying to inflict damage, because otherwise, if you just let him go to town on you, he's going to do just that. So you still got to try to use your melee attacks and your special attacks, and just with all these monsters, brute force is going to be your best tactics here. Next up of the big three is Mecha Godzilla, and he first appears on Pluto. He's also got the I-beam, the rainbow beam that he fires from his eyes, and of course he can punch and kick and ram you. Again, just a very strong monster to deal with. He'll use that rainbow beam on you at a very high clip, higher than Gigan uses his I-beam, which makes him more dangerous because that does inflict a decent amount of damage. So you've really got to be mindful of that. Obviously, this version of Mechagodzilla was like I had previously stated, with these monsters based on the Showa era version, with of course the evil entity controlled by aliens. So, like I said, definitely your second toughest enemy monster that you're gonna face in the game. So, again, like I said, just try to use the brute force on him. And then last, but obviously not least, the third of the big three, and essentially the final boss of the game, none other than King Ghidorah himself, Godzilla's arch rival. Of course, the three-headed dragon here, and does not appear until the final world, Planet X. So that obviously shows once you reach Neptune, you don't have any new monsters that appear, because like I said, King Ghidorah only appears on Planet X. So in a way, it's kind of a shame that his appearance is limited in the game, but at the same time, it's a blessing in disguise, because obviously far and away the most difficult of the enemy monsters to deal with in the game. Obviously he's got his electroblasts or anti-gravity beams, as they're otherwise called, that he can fire at you, and he'll use those at a decent clip. And again, those are very dangerous attacks. He'll also, because he's pretty much in that flying position all the time, but he will charge and ram you, and he can be very, very aggressive. So he's like I said, he's a real, these all three of the big three are forces to be reckoned with, but he is by far the most dangerous in the game. And one thing that I kind of wanted to bring up here, my suggestion when dealing with him is, once you reach the space next to his, what I like to do is, when the game asks you if you want to engage him in combat, I say no. And then I'll just go through the stage of where I'm at, and then when it's King Ghidorah's turn, he'll go and he'll engage you in combat. Excuse me. The reason being is because he can inflict a lot of damage on you. So if you engage him in combat and then he gets a turn right after you, that's I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but you're really risking losing a life though with that. So that's why I don't like to engage him. I like to let him engage me in combat. If I don't make it through, then generally I'll because obviously you can clear spaces as many times as you want. I'll, maybe backtrack and then move forward again a space. Obviously, again, not engaging him, just letting him engage me. But this way, at least I can try to recover health and whatnot, and then just try to take him on again. So basically, rinse, wash, repeat until you can defeat him. That's my best strategy for trying to take on King Ghidorah. So hopefully that helps anybody that was interested, in knowing that at least. So anyway, now that we've covered the basics of the monsters are playable monsters, then the main boss monsters of the game. Next up here. Now, excuse me, I'm sorry. Now, these are some items that you want to look out for in the game. There's really two in particular. Those being the health capsules and the energy capsules. I know the energy capsules picture's not the best, but that's the only sort of stage that you'll see those appear. The health capsules appear throughout the game. Obviously, these are the ones that you're going to need the most. Obviously, they do restore your life meter somewhat. I believe they restore up to 4 bars of health at a time, so each one can restore 4 bars of health. But they're usually very numerous and appear, like I said, throughout the entire game. These are going to be what you're going to want to try to attain the most of course, and try to keep your your life as full as possible. There's a lot of obstacles and enemies that attack you in the game, and it's very easy to lose health. So that's why getting these is essential to completing the game. You cannot do it without these. And then the energy capsules, which only appear, you see that background, that's from one of the hyperspace stages. Certain enemies these certain orangish enemies that you can defeat there will release these energy capsules. Those like with the health capsules refill 4 bars of your power meter though. Which can be helpful, but since they only really appear here, they don't do a whole lot. I'm more concerned, obviously, with the health capsules than the energy capsules. But if you need it at that point in time, at least they do restore some of your power meter. But again, though, like I said, with the power meter, it gradually restores itself in time anyway. So. But at least, though, it's something to keep an eye out on. Now, with that, this is something that I definitely wanted to mention. This is something that you really want to avoid at all costs. I never really found an official name for it, but many of us have called it the flying horseshoe of doom, or death, if you will. This flying horseshoe-shaped object, as you can see, it is a standard enemy, but it is one that's essentially invincible, meaning you really cannot defeat it at all. And it flies from one end of the screen to the other, obviously to attack your monster, and it sort of has like a homing device on it where it kind of tracks your movements. So really you have to be very wary of these things, because when they hit you, it'll sort of like grind it out going through your character, and really can inflict very severe damage. And if you're not careful enough, you can actually lose a life over getting too severely hit by one of these. So the key is to try to get minimally hit, try to back up to the far left of the of the screen, obviously, when you're facing it, so you're as far back as you can be, because it goes, obviously, you'll start out on that, facing the screen, start out from the right side and carry through to the left, to basically go and attack your monster. But it'll just fly through to the end. But like I said, you kind of want to minimize any damage or avoid it altogether. With Mothra, it's not too bad because, again, because she's flying around on the screen, you can essentially evade these a lot easier than you can with Godzilla. Godzilla, obviously, a much bigger target, not as fast moving, but you kind of maybe want to shift your body because, like I said, it'll kind of track your movements, but it doesn't. But it's not completely in sync with you. So if you can sort of shift your body and your position quickly enough, you can avoid it completely with Godzilla. These don't start appearing until Mars, about halfway through the world is when you'll start seeing these appear. But then obviously they appear throughout the rest of the game as a standard enemy. But again, though, you just got to be very, very wary of these and just try to avoid them at all costs. So that's it for the Flying Horseshoe of Doom, though. Now, I wanted to point out some sort of Easter egg characters that appear in the game. They're not any main bosses. They just really appear as, main enemies or objects, if you will, throughout the game. And they're Easter eggs because they're nods to other Toho films, of course, that you'll obviously, like I said, have to face throughout the game. And there's more than these as well. You've got Dogoro, which I didn't put up here, that appears in the hyperspace stages, and then of course some of the spaceships that you encounter in the game resemble both the Exilian spaceships from Godzilla vs. Monster Zero and the Keylok spaceships from Destroy All Monsters. And of course there's others as well. So these are, like I said, characters that you'll face in the game, and I always consider them like Easter eggs, basically. So the first and foremost, and I always thought this was the case, but later confirmed it. As you can see here, you've got Manda. And like I said, this was the one that I always thought was him, but never confirmed until later on in life. He appears as a regular enemy in the volcanic stages, and it's really, really cool to see him. I wish that he was a boss enemy, but cool to see him nonetheless. Then, of course, you've got Matango from the movie Matango, which appears as one of the hyperspace stages, and it's sort of like a mini boss battle, as it's kind of considered. But if you defeat it, you get a lot of points, which can obviously help to attain leveling up and whatnot. So, good thing to actually encounter these and take them down, the Matangos. Next, you've got the Gotango, obviously first appearing in the movie The Atragon. Just as Manda did as well. With the Gotango, you'll see it appearing as a sort of object, high in the air on whichever stage screen that you'll be on. But it does sort of unleash these sort of energy blasts that it kind of fires down on you. But it's not too much to deal with on that. When you sing it in this form, but then you'll later encounter it in a hyperspace stage close up. Obviously, you'll see it in its full form, where it's much, much larger. You'll actually see it's much larger than your monster, actually. But just as with the Matango, you can take it on as a sort of mini boss battle and obviously gain a lot of points and possibly level up from defeating it. Again, obviously these do appear throughout. The Gotango, though, in the hyperspace stage, doesn't appear until later in the game, where you start seeing that. You've also got, and this doesn't always get pointed out, but you've got the Fire Dragon, which was a nod to Destroy All Monsters when the when the Keylok spaceship was disguised as that fire dragon, all the the people of Earth thought that it was a fire dragon until it was revealed that it was a spaceship. So even though this one actually appears as a fire dragon, I do know that it is a nod just to that sequence from Destroy All Monsters, and that obviously appears in the volcanic stages. And then the other Easter egg that I highlighted here is the Moonlight SY3, obviously from Destroy All Monsters, but this is not an enemy. This is actually one of the Earth ships, and they actually they drop some energy, these energy blasts that can help you with defeating enemies. They also drop down health capsules as well, so they're your allies, actually, the Moonlight SY3, and that makes sense since that was obviously the Earth-controlled ship and whatnot. So that's really cool that they actually did include it in the game. You'll see it appearing throughout in a large percentage of the stages, and especially with them dropping the health capsules, that provides a big help when playing through the game. So those were some of the things that I kind of wanted to point out. Like I said, pointing out kind of going through the crux of the main storyline, as well as each of the 8 worlds, and then of course with the playable monsters, and then of course your legion of monsters that you've got to face. And so carrying all the way through here with some of these Easter egg characters, and that pretty much does take us to this point. So with that, folks, that does pretty much take us to the end of this video. Like I said, kind of just wanted to go through some of the stuff about the game, as well as maybe just some, obviously some tips, with playing through it, trying to be strategy based, with where you maneuver your monsters to be placed on the map screen, as well as some tips for facing some of your enemy boss monsters, and especially so with my suggestion with King Ghidorah. So I hope that does kind of help anyone that was interested. Again, not a top 10 favorite video game for me, but definitely a top 20 favorite video game of all time for me. I actually really do love this game. I love that it's adventure / platformer based. As far as I know, basically the only Godzilla game that's like that. And where you've still got battles in between, obviously against the Legion of Monsters, so you still got those boss battles. So it just, for me, makes for a really fun experience, and that's why it's my personal favorite Godzilla game, one that I really love, and again, obviously still continue to play to this day, and will always play through, basically. So I was, again, really excited to be able to do this video, and I hope that you all enjoyed it. I hope that maybe I provided a little bit of insight. Sorry I bounced around a little bit, but I did want to backtrack for some things that kind of clicked to me that I did want to mention later on, or at some point anyway. But other than that, though, folks, again, this does take us to the end, so I do thank you so much for watching. If you would like to subscribe, please feel free to do so. Also, feel free to like and or comment on my videos. And other than that, just remember, until next time, you be good to yourselves, and sayonara.